The afternoon sun streamed through the oval cabin windows of Flight 782, scattering golden light across the rows of passengers. The air was calm, filled with the soft hum of twin Rolls-Royce engines pushing the aircraft high above the clouds. It was a 6-hour journey from London to Dubai, a routine commercial flight for everyone on board, or so it seemed. In seat 8A, near the left window, Emily Carter, an 18-year-old aviation student, shifted slightly in her seat. She had been awake since dawn, traveling alone for the first time. Her flight bag sat tucked under the seat in front of her, filled with flight manuals, notebooks, and a small model airplane keychain, a gift from her late father, who'd once been an air traffic controller. She yawned, stretched, and slipped her headphones over her ears. Soft jazz piano drifted through, blending with the rhythmic drone of the engines. Her eyes grew heavy as she looked outside. The world below was nothing but a sea of white, layers of clouds glowing like silk. She smiled faintly. One day, she promised herself, she wouldn't just be sitting here as a passenger. One day, she'd be up front in the cockpit, guiding a machine like this across the sky. The plane glided smoothly, attendants moving gracefully down the aisles. A baby giggled somewhere near row 15. A businessman typed furiously on his laptop. The scent of coffee filled the air as the crew served drinks and snacks. Everything was peaceful, a perfect ordinary flight, but fate rarely sends warnings before it strikes. In the cockpit, Captain William Reynolds, a 20-year veteran pilot, with silver hair and steady eyes, was chatting casually with his co-pilot, Mark Lawson, a 34-year-old former Air Force pilot turned commercial aviator. "Smooth air today," Reynolds said, glancing at the instruments. "Feels like a good run." "Couldn't ask for better weather," Mark replied with a grin, checking the navigation display. "We'll reach Dubai right on schedule." Reynolds leaned back, sipping his coffee. But as he set the cup down, something strange happened. His hand trembled. A sudden wave of dizziness hit him, sharp, unexpected. He blinked hard, trying to focus, but the cockpit lights blurred into a haze. "Captain?" Mark asked, noticing the tremor. "You okay, sir?" Reynolds opened his mouth to answer, but his voice came out slurred, the words tangled. His face had gone pale. "Capta." Mark started again, but before he could finish, Reynolds slumped forward, collapsing against the control panel with a dull thud. The autopilot disengaged with a sharp beep, 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 and the aircraft dipped slightly to the left. "Captain!" Mark shouted, grabbing his shoulder. No response. He checked for a pulse, weak but there. Reynolds was breathing, but unconscious.
Adrenaline surged through Mark's veins. He pressed the intercom switch on the control column. "Mayday! Mayday, this is Flight 782. We have a medical emergency. The captain is unresponsive. Request immediate medical assistance and clearance."
"For priority landing!" Air traffic control's calm voice crackled through the radio, asking for details. Mark's voice was tight, his hands shaking slightly as he re-engaged the autopilot manually. "I'm the first officer, maintaining control for now," he said, trying to steady his breathing. "Captain Reynolds has collapsed. I repeat, the captain is unconscious." Outside, the sky began to change. The smooth white clouds thickened into rolling gray waves. The once peaceful light dimmed as the plane flew toward a patch of turbulence. The autopilot jerked slightly, compensating for the crosswinds. In the cabin, passengers began to notice the shift. The flight attendants exchanged worried looks as the cockpit door stayed shut longer than usual. A slight rumble passed through the aircraft, causing coffee cups to tremble. Emily stirred awake, blinking. The sunlight had faded, replaced by a pale gray glow. She noticed the crew whispering at the front. Something felt wrong. Through her headphones, she barely heard the ding of the seatbelt sign coming on. A flight attendant's voice came over, the speaker calm but tight. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We're experiencing some mild turbulence." But behind that calm announcement, a deeper tension was rising. In the cockpit, Mark's mind raced. He called for the chief flight attendant through the intercom. "Get in here. The captain's down. Bring the medical kit now." Moments later, the door opened, and the purser gasped at the sight of the unconscious captain slumped over the controls. Mark was sweating, fighting to stabilize the aircraft as alarms blinked across the screens. "Secure the captain," Mark ordered, voice shaking but firm. "I'll handle the flight." Outside, the world turned darker as clouds swirled around the aircraft. The plane shuddered once, then steadied. Mark's heart pounded as he spoke again into the radio. "Mayday," repeating, "Captain unconscious. Flight 782 declaring an emergency." Inside the cabin, passengers had no idea that their flight, once so ordinary, had just crossed into the unknown. And in seat 8A, Emily Carter, unaware of the storm about to unfold, stared out the window. As thunder rolled far below, a silent omen of the chaos waiting ahead. The soft ding of the seatbelt sign cut through the low hum of the cabin. The tiny light above each seat flicked on, and a ripple of unease passed through the passengers. Flight attendants, who had been smiling only moments before, now moved quickly and quietly down the aisle. Their calm expressions had shifted. Tight smiles, hurried whispers, eyes darting toward the cockpit door. Emily Carter, still in seat 8A, stirred awake, rubbing her eyes. The music in her headphones had long stopped. All she could hear now was the faint rustle of panic in the air. She sat up, sensing something wasn't right. Two attendants passed her row, their voices low and urgent. "Do we have any updates from the cockpit?" one asked. "Not yet," the other whispered back. "He said medical emergency, that's all I know," Emily frowned. "Medical emergency?" she repeated softly to herself. She pressed the call button. A moment later, a young flight attendant approached, her smile strained. "Is everything okay?" Emily asked. "Yes, ma'am. Just some turbulence. Please remain seated," the attendant said, her voice polite but trembling slightly. Emily knew that tone. She'd heard it before during flight simulations, the voice people use when they're trying to hide fear. Then, the intercom crackled. The cabin fell silent. Even the crying baby stopped, as if sensing something was wrong. A male voice came through, shaky but composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking. We are currently experiencing a medical emergency involving a member of our flight crew. If there is a licensed pilot on board, please make yourself known to the cabin crew immediately." For a few seconds, the words hung in the air, almost unreal. Then came the rising hum of panic. Did he just say pilot? Wait, does that mean the captain? Oh my God, is something wrong with the plane? What kind of emergency? Passengers turned to one another, fear written across their faces. Some whispered prayers, others fumbled for their phones. The steady hum of the engines suddenly felt louder, heavier, a reminder that 30,000 feet of air separated them from the earth below. Emily's heart began to pound. Her stomach knotted, her pulse thudding in her ears. She wasn't licensed yet, not for commercial aircraft. But she knew aviation. She knew checklists, procedures, radio calls, trim controls, everything a small aircraft pilot needed to know. Her rational mind screamed, "Stay seated. This isn't your job. Someone else will step up." But another voice, calmer, deeper, whispered, "What if no one else can?" She looked around. No one had moved. The aisle was frozen in fear. The flight attendants were waiting, eyes scanning the passengers desperately. Emily's throat went dry. She thought of her father, how he used to say, "Pilots don't wait for someone else to act. They become the calm in the storm." She took a deep breath and unbuckled her seatbelt. The metallic click sounded far too loud. The man sitting beside her looked up startled. "Miss, you shouldn't be getting up right now." "I know," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "But I think I can help." Emily stood, her knees shaking slightly as she walked toward the front. Every step felt heavier than the last. Dozens of eyes followed her, whispering as she passed. A senior flight attendant met her halfway down the aisle. "Miss, please, sit down. It's not safe to be standing." Emily hesitated, then spoke quickly, her voice firm despite the pounding in her chest. "I'm not a licensed commercial pilot, but I'm a trained student pilot. I've flown small aircraft and have extensive simulator hours. If the captain's incapacitated, your first officer might need help. The attendant blinked, stunned. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then she nodded sharply. "Follow me." As Emily walked behind her, the murmurs grew louder. Is she a pilot? "She's just a kid." Oh God, what's happening up there? The flight attendant opened the curtain near the galley and knocked on the cockpit door. Speaking into the intercom, "First Officer Lawson, we may have a passenger with flight experience." There was a brief silence. Then the co-pilot's strained voice came through. "Bring her in, now." The door clicked open, and Emily caught a glimpse of flashing red and amber lights on the control panel. Inside, it looked like chaos, yet controlled chaos. The first officer's face was pale, sweat glistening on his forehead. Behind him, the captain lay slumped in his seat, oxygen mask over his mouth. Emily's breath caught. For a moment, the weight of what she was walking into nearly broke her resolve. This wasn't a simulator. This was real. But then she heard it. The faint buzz of the engines, steady and strong. The plane was still flying. That sound steadied her. She stepped inside. Mark turned to her, his voice urgent. "You said you have flight training?" "Yes, sir." "Small aircraft, Cessna 172 mostly. I can read instruments, assist with procedures." Mark nodded quickly. "Good enough. We're on autopilot for now, but the system's unstable. ATC is aware. Sit down here and monitor altitude and heading." Emily slid into the jump seat, heart racing, but focused. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the headset. The cockpit felt alive, buttons glowing, radios hissing, the weight of 185 lives pressing against every breath. Outside, dark clouds gathered like an approaching storm. The autopilot warning light blinked once, then twice. "Easy," Mark muttered, stabilizing the yoke. "We're okay for now," Emily nodded. "Copy that. I'll watch the gauges." Behind them, the cabin remained tense, unaware that an 18-year-old girl had just entered the cockpit, and that the fate of Flight 782 might soon rest in her hands. The cockpit door swung open, and for a split second, Emily froze. The space in front of her was alive, flashing red and amber warnings, shrill beeps echoing through the narrow chamber. The scent of burnt coffee mixed with the sharp tang of electronics. Every screen glowed with data. Every sound pulsed with urgency. The first officer, Mark Lawson, looked up, his eyes bloodshot and wide. His uniform collar was damp with sweat. "You said you have flight training?" he demanded, his voice quick and clipped. Emily nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, small aircraft, not commercial, but I can assist. I know basic flight systems, radio calls, navigation." Mark hesitated for only a moment. His gaze darted to the unconscious Captain Reynolds, who lay, slumped in the left seat, breathing shallowly through an oxygen mask. Mark's jaw tightened. "All right," he said finally. "We'll take all the help we can get." Emily stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking softly against the metal floor. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were locked on the instruments. Altimeter, attitude indicator, heading, airspeed, the language of flight. It was all familiar, yet magnified tenfold. She took a deep breath and spoke steadily. "Autopilot engaged?" "Yes," Mark replied. "But it's unstable. Keeps trying to overcorrect on climb rate. ATC's on standby." Emily leaned closer to the control column, analyzing the pitch. "Okay, let's level her out. Altitude hold at 30,000 feet. Trim right, just a little." Mark adjusted the trim tab. The aircraft, which had been slightly dipping to the left, steadied. The alarms softened into steady beeps, then fell silent. For the first time in 10 tense minutes, the plane flew straight. "Good," Emily said quietly. "She's calm now." Mark exhaled a shaky breath. "You've done this before." "Not like this," she admitted. "But instruments don't change. Only the stakes do." Outside the windshield, the sky stretched endless and pale, streaked with the golden light of the setting sun. The horizon looked peaceful, a cruel contrast to the chaos inside. The engines purred steadily, the world below lost in a haze of clouds. The radio crackled. "Flight 782, we read you. Do you have control? Mark reached for the transmitter, but Emily's hand moved faster. She pressed the button, her voice clear and confident. This is Emily Carter, assisting the first officer. The captain is unconscious. We have partial control of the aircraft. There was a pause on the other end, a mix of surprise and disbelief. Then the calm, professional tone of air traffic control returned. Copy that, Flight 782. Emily. Carter, can you confirm your flight experience? I'm a student pilot, she said. Single-engine aircraft, Cessna 172. Hundreds of simulator hours. I can assist with navigation, checklist procedures, and manual control if needed. Understood, ATC replied. You're doing fine. We're alerting emergency services in Dubai. Maintain heading 115 and altitude at 30,000 feet. Expect vectors for emergency approach shortly. Emily nodded to Mark. Copy that. Heading 115, altitude 30,000. Mark glanced at her again, almost studying her. This 18-year-old girl who had just stepped into one of the most high-pressure situations imaginable and was holding herself together better than most trained pilots could. He managed a small, incredulous laugh. You're calm. How? Emily smiled faintly. I'm not. I'm terrified. But fear's useless right now. She checked the fuel levels, scanning the overhead panel as her voice fell into a rhythm. Engine stable. Fuel pressure nominal. Cabin pressure holding steady. Mark nodded, matching her tone, their teamwork seamless despite the strangeness of it all. In minutes, they had become a crew. Down below, emergency crews across the UAE scrambled into action. Fire trucks lined the runways, ambulances waiting, hospitals alerted. The news had already reached controllers across Europe and the Middle East. A captain down, a student pilot assisting, 185 lives in the balance. Back in the cockpit, time seemed to move differently. Every second stretched. Every click of a dial mattered. Approach control is routing us to a priority landing, Mark said after a moment, checking his screen. But if the autopilot fails, I might need manual assist. Emily looked at him steadily. Then we'll fly her down together. Mark met her eyes and nodded, conviction settling where panic once lived. All right, let's bring them home. The radio crackled again with instructions, and Emily reached for the co-pilot's log, jotting notes with steady precision. Below them, the lights of Dubai glimmered faintly on the horizon, a beacon of safety still hours away. Inside that cramped, glowing cockpit, something extraordinary had just begun. A teenager who had only dreamed of flight was now helping save an entire aircraft. And as the sky darkened outside, the young girl in seat 8A had truly become a pilot. 2 tense hours later, the Dubai skyline glimmered on the horizon, a string of gold lights stretching out beneath a deep orange dusk. Inside the cockpit, every sound, every vibration of the engines felt magnified. The hum of the aircraft was steady, but the silence between Emily and Mark was thick with concentration. Descent checklist, Emily said, breaking the quiet. Her voice was low but firm, measured like she'd practiced it 100 times in a simulator. Mark nodded. Roger that. Flaps set, speed brakes armed. The glow of the instrument panel painted their faces in amber light. Sweat glistened on Mark's forehead as he adjusted the throttle. His right hand gripped the control yoke tight. His left wiped his palm against his uniform pants. Emily read the next line. Landing gear, down and locked. The soft mechanical whir of the gear lowering filled the cockpit, followed by 3 reassuring green lights on the panel. She exhaled slowly. Flaps 30, speed 160 knots. Altitude descending through 3,000. Outside, through the windshield, the city came into view, the famous Burj Khalifa piercing the sunset like a silver needle. The runway lights of Dubai International Airport blinked in the distance, waiting for them like a promise. The radio crackled to life. Flight 782. You are cleared for emergency landing on runway 30. Right. Winds calm, visibility clear. Emergency crews are standing by. Copy, runway 30. Right, Mark replied. His voice was tight but controlled. Behind them, in the cabin, 185 passengers sat in absolute silence. Some gripped the armrests, others held hands, and a few whispered prayers under their breath. No one dared to move. The flight attendants sat strapped in, eyes shut, lips moving in quiet faith. Emily glanced once at Mark. "We're good," she said softly. "Stable descent," he nodded but said nothing. The weight of the moment pressed down on both of them. Every second mattered. Every control input could decide their fate. "All right," Emily continued, reading from memory now. "Flaps full. Maintain glide slope. Airspeed 160, Mark complied, guiding the jet through a thin veil of clouds. For a moment, they were flying blind, white mist swallowing the cockpit, the runway invisible. "Keep it steady," Emily whispered. "Trust your instruments," he did. The altimeter ticked down at 1,000 feet. 800, 600. Then suddenly, the clouds broke open, revealing the glowing runway ahead. "There it is," Mark breathed. "Runway in sight." "Visual confirmed," Emily replied, her tone calm but her pulse racing. "You're lined up." Perfect approach. The lights of Dubai blurred past below them, highways, towers, the faint shimmer of desert beyond. The aircraft's nose tilted slightly, and Emily called out every movement like a steady heartbeat. 500 feet. "Flare in 5. Hold your rate. Little less throttle." Mark followed her rhythm. The plane floated over the threshold, engines humming in harmony. Then, thud. The landing gear kissed the runway with a soft, perfect touch. For a moment, there was silence. Then the reverse thrusters roared to life, the plane slowing rapidly down the tarmac. The cabin lights flickered as brakes engaged. And when the aircraft finally rolled to a stop, straight, steady, and safe, the silence shattered. A wave of cheers and applause exploded from the cabin. Some passengers cried openly, others clapped until their palms turned red. From the back of the plane came a voice shouting, "She did it!" "The girl from 8A saved us." Mark leaned back in his seat, shaking his head in disbelief, a shaky laugh escaping his lips. He turned toward Emily, who sat motionless, her hands still resting lightly on the control column. "You just helped land a Boeing 777, he said softly. Emily blinked, her eyes glistening. "We landed it," she corrected with a trembling smile. Moments later, paramedics rushed on board, carrying medical kits and oxygen tanks. They hurried to the captain, still breathing but weak. One of them looked up at Emily and gave a small, astonished nod, the kind reserved for someone who'd done the impossible. Mark stood, removing his headset. "Emily," he said, his voice quieter now, full of genuine awe. "I've flown combat missions, storm diversions, engine failures, but I've never seen composure like yours." She looked down at her trembling hands, then at the view outside, emergency lights flashing blue and red against the runway. "I only did what any pilot would do," she whispered. As the cabin doors opened and passengers began to disembark, the sound of applause filled the air once more. Dozens of faces turned toward her, some tearful, some smiling, all grateful. A small child waved from the aisle. An old woman pressed her hands together in thanks. Emily stood near the exit, her flight jacket still draped over her shoulders, her hair loose from the headset. Each passenger who passed said something. "Thank you. God bless you. You're amazing." By the time she stepped off the plane, the Dubai night air hit her face like a rush of freedom. The scent of jet fuel mixed with desert wind. She looked back once, at the massive aircraft that had carried her through fear, chaos, and courage, and smiled through tears. Mark caught up beside her. "You know," he said, "you could have a future in this business." Emily laughed softly. "That's the plan." As camera crews began to gather near the terminal, their flashes lighting the night, Emily Carter, the 18-year-old girl from seat 8A, walked down the tarmac, her shadow stretching long behind her. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the adrenaline and exhaustion, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of her flying story. It was only the beginning.